Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here. Greetings from Helsinki, which yesterday was the warmest city in Europe. And I don't think that's ever happened before, so it's nice coming to the bit chillier Dublin today. It's a bit difficult being the analytics guy at a conversion conference. There's a party pooping mood to it. People love to celebrate conversions and these cool tricks and strategies, and then there's the one guy who goes like, but have you checked the data? And I'm that guy, unfortunately. I have tried to pivot the last years and try not to spin such a negative spin to it. So today I will be, it's kind of therapeutic for me as well, I will be trying to tackle this from an organizational perspective and talking about meaningful data, which is a very ambiguous title, I'll give you that, and maybe we'll learn about what that means along the way. But what I want to talk about is how data and organizations mash up together. And this, I hope, is relevant for conversion optimization. It's certainly relevant for user experience research, for anything where you need to validate anything. One thing I've learned over the past years is that we can do a lot of things with tactics and we'll do a lot of things with strategy. But if the organization around us doesn't support us, whether we're consultants or in-house, we're going to have a very hard time, making the message fall. I'll just skip my introduction, it's boring. So, what is meaningful data? Like I said, it's ambiguous. I think what I'm trying to approach this is Google Analytics is a lovely tool, very easy to pick on, maybe because it's so popular. I guess by any standard it's the most popular web analytics tool currently in use. And the question that pops up is that, does it need customization? Or I mean, we can plug it in. It's quite simple to add to the website these days, even to mobile apps. And we get data instantly, and we get some kind of instant gratification when we see the real-time numbers shoot up. We can just stare at that screen for hours on end. It's like a vanity metric at its best. But what can we actually do with this information? And can we use it to somehow make our efforts more transparent? Can we use it to somehow question the validity of our conversion results, for example? Many people speak about uplift, like uplift of 5%, uplift of 11%. I've seen some speakers today use that as well. Here I go with my spoiling the mood. And I'm always interested in, what are the numbers underneath that uplift? What are we comparing it to? Michael added the sample size, which is wonderful. We know how many conversions we have. We know what this level of significance is. But is that still enough? Can we use that information to help our particular idiosyncratic organizations grow? And this is what I want to talk about today. We use data to, obviously, we want to learn from our mistakes. So we look in the rearview mirror and we see that, we did this and this and this and this happened, so let's not do that again. That was a mistake. We use it to fail fast, fail early, fail often. Obviously, we want to plan ahead. We want to look at data and see that worked. So let's reproduce it in the future. And we know this stuff. We use it to celebrate success. And I think this isn't talked about that often in a serious context. But I think that vanity metrics are really important. I think it's necessary to pat ourselves on the back when we have successes. And I don't think we give us enough room to do that. But how can we get to this point where data actually works for us instead of the other way around? Because it seems like we're all the time customizing this information. So how can data become meaningful? And I have scrunched it down to this. So we have tactics, which are the tips and tricks we use to build our conversion plans or to optimize our analytics data and to build reports and to fetch data from those reports. Then we have the strategic part, the understanding of our business context. Absolutely necessary to make any sense of data. But we know that tactics without a strategy underlying them easily become just cheap parlor tricks. They're illusions. We look at these famous button color tests, and we try to reproduce them on our sites, and then we fail, and we wonder, why did we fail? I thought this tactic was waterproof. And strategy without a tactical understanding or a tool understanding becomes just, vacuous hand-waving in the boardroom. People are looking at whiteboards and thinking, where should we go with our company? But if we don't understand the tool ecosystem we're using, we're not going to get anywhere. So the glue that brings this together, in my view, the holy grail that brings this trinity together, would be some kind of agile model. And that's what I wanted to talk about in the last part of today's talk. How can we help our organization use data more effectively? How can we use our organization to turn a tool like Google Analytics to tell something about our particular needs and our particular goals, or Optimize, or Optimizely, or Visual Website Optimize, whatever tools we use, how do we take that information and make it relevant for our organizations? Because out of the box, they don't do it. And I'll show you why they don't do it. So tool expertise, absolutely necessary. Google Analytics is a tool that's been normalized for 1 billion different organizations. Like it's been designed by engineers in their little cocoon in Mountain View or wherever they developed those tools, or Urchin back in the day. And it's been normalized. It has to be good enough for all the companies and organizations that use it. It can't have anything specific. Otherwise, it will rule out too large part of a population. So we need to take a tool like Google Analytics and bend it to our will so that it starts telling us important stuff about our organization. So this is a default report in like a dashboard view in Google Analytics. You get this with every single view that you create. This is the default dashboard. It gives us highly actionable metrics like page views, bounce and conversion rate, and sessions. So we have data, right? We can show this graph to our board of directors. We can show that there's a slight uplift, and we can celebrate that success. We can show that we have people viewing our pages. We can show that we have sessions. We can show that we have transactions even. And we can use this information to do something, but is this enough? Conversion rate and bounce rate are completely devoid of meaning until you actually inject some meaning into the tool that produces these metrics. A bounce rate by default is a single interaction session, right? Avinash Kaushik, who's the evangelist for analytics at Google, says a bounce is when I came, I puked, I left. Right, that's a bounce. But by default, we don't know if that's the case. We don't know what their bowel movements were during that session. All we know is that they sent a single interaction hit. But who knows what else they did? Maybe they picked up the phone, called the salespeople, and ordered €1 million worth of merchandise. So it was a really, really successful session. But because we didn't encode this information into the analytics tool, all we're being told is that it was a bounce. Conversion rate is really difficult as well. Conversion rate optimization, that's the name of this weird thing that we're doing. It's a really bad name. We're not optimizing a metric. We're optimizing businesses that produce those metrics. If we turn to conversion rate optimization, I can give you a golden tip. In Google Analytics, set a goal for every single page on your site, and you will have 100% conversion rate. That's a huge uplift. You can do it as soon as you go back to the office. You can do that and wow your peers. That's the problem. We're talking about metrics. We're talking about insignificant things when we should be thinking about what the organization actually produces this. And sessions is it's an interesting thing. It's the focal point of Google Analytics. It's the main aggregate bucket. I think pretty much all analytics tools mention sessions in some way. And if we deconstruct the Google Analytics session, what do we find? We find that it's a group of interactions that takes place on a website. Obviously, there's the 30-minute timeout window. You all know that, right? So 30 minutes of inactivity, and you're kind of thrown out of the session. So if you go and brew a pot of coffee or take the dog for a walk, your session ends, obviously, because that's how the world works. Or at the end of the day, if you start browsing the website at 1 minute to midnight, then in 1 minute your session will end and a new one will start right after midnight. Yeah, that's a good reflection of reality again. Do you throw all your visitors out of your store at a specific time only to invite them back right after? Or when the acquisition campaign changes, unless the referral is in the referral exclusion list or traffic is cross-domain, unless you've implemented that incorrectly, which is easy to do because it's so difficult. Unless you use Google Tag Manager, but obviously that might be incorrect as well. There's the session control parameter, very useful. I've seen it once in the wild. Mobile and single-page apps, what's a session? Server-side stuff, there's weird things going on in Google when it comes to server-side stuff. Cookies, logos, persistent things from one page to the other. So when you're talking about the conversion rate to your board of directors or whoever wants to own that information, and you talk, we had an amazing uplift in conversion rate, in Google Analytics conversions per session, or our e-commerce transaction rate. Do you think that this smashing young fellow is actively thinking what they are actually saying, what the underlying mechanism is of this jargon? Like, what is a conversion rate? What is the underlying concept of a session? This complicated algorithm that I just showed you. Well, obviously that's not the case. We don't think about these things. And I'm wondering, should we? Like, it's such a fundamental part of Google Analytics. It's such a fundamental part of how all analytics tools aggregate things. Should we think about this stuff? Or am I being just anal? Am I being too specific and pedantic here? Well, I think that there's a middle ground somewhere. But the fact of the matter is that we are talking about metrics without necessarily understanding how those metrics are produced. And one of our missions as analysts in organization, or as people who claim to work with data or claim to work with conversions, is to take the time to learn this stuff and then customize the tools so that these default metrics, these algorithms, become more realistic for our organizations. Here's just another example. This is a default report in Google Analytics, right? You go to the acquisition reports and this is what you'll see. Google Analytics session definition, all of these metrics, sessions, bounce rate, pages per session, average session duration, e-commerce conversion rate, they are all sessionized. So if you take the algorithm I showed you, and if you change the default timeout from 30 minutes to 29 minutes, which you can do in the settings, by the way, every single one of these metrics will change as a result. That's how fragile, that's how incredibly fragile the relationship is between a tweak in the settings of your analytics tool and the actual numbers that you are reporting forward and onward. So the algorithm is malleable for good and bad. I mean, we can change it to improve our numbers. We can change it to make our sessions go up. But similarly, if we don't touch it, then we'll be using a definition made by some engineer years and years ago. And that's not all. We talk about engagement. Especially as a publisher myself, I think about engagement a lot, but engagement isn't just about content, it's about products, it's about how people engage with our brands. Google Analytics doesn't encode engagement in its metrics in any way. We have bounce rate. We have bounce rate. Okay, I'll give you that. But let's see what bounce rate is trying to encode by default. Visibility. We have visible pages and we have invisible pages. We have visible content and invisible content. Did you know that Google Analytics sends a page view for every page loaded, not just the ones that we're actually seeing? So if you open pages in browser tabs, you're actually sending page views for each, even though you're not actually viewing the page. So the mistake is in the very semantics of the label. Same thing with content. Are you sending a page view for all the content blocks or events for all the content blocks, or only when user scrolls down to them? We have all these different types of interaction on the website that are not encoded by default in our analytics data. We need to measure those. We have clicks, scrolls, key presses, highlights, highlighting words, highlighting copy. We have the copy to the clipboard. Then we have all those things. We have the touch devices like long press. None of these are encoded by default. We need to measure those if we find them important to our organization and to our growth. Dwell time. Time metrics are really difficult to get right. We have things like we can measure SERP bounce time. How long did it take for the user to bounce back to the search engine results page? Really interesting stuff for organic search. Idling time. Time where you're not doing anything by the computer. Your mouse is not moving, you're not scrolling. Active time, time when you're typing or scrolling or moving the mouse cursor. Reading time, what is reading? We have all these different temporal metrics that we could be measuring, but are we doing that? Or are we just trusting GA's default metrics? Then we have goals, short-term goals like subscribing to mailing lists, printing stuff. Long-term goals, acquiring more followers, more revenue per user. Qualitative stuff, buzz feedback. This is engagement, and just in a nutshell, this is what I came up with well, I'm going to exaggerate now, but just in a few minutes of thinking. Just some dimensions that we could be measuring, and yet we still use these two metrics to explain what engagement is when reporting. And I don't think that's enough. Bounce rate becomes infinitely better once you start encoding these things as something that affect bounce. Conversion rate becomes infinitely better once you start thinking what a conversion is in terms of the things GA isn't measuring by default. And we can do this. This is the tactical stuff we can do. Here's average time on page as reported by GA by default. By default, time on page is measured between 2 page views. So you send a page view and then you send another page. That's the time on page for the first page. Now you know the problem if you open 1 million browser tabs. That's like 1 second time on page for each because there are subsequent page views. So we can fix that. We can create a new metric. The links are in the slides, but we can create a new metric called engagement time, which only measures time when you're actually scrolling the page or moving the cursor or pressing keyboard keys. And when I did this for a content site, the average time on page was something like 7 times more than the average engagement per page. This was significant to me. So GA is reporting this and this as the time on page, but what people are actually doing, actively interacting with the page, is so much less. So we need to do this if we think that time on page is an important metric. We need to look at it, understand what's fundamentally flawed with it, and then fix it. Or, we're talking about e-commerce today. No one's forcing you to use the e-commerce reports for e-commerce. You could use it for content as well. This is the enhanced e-commerce reports of Google Analytics, but used for content instead of products. Product revenue is the total words of the articles that were read on the site. Wonderful vanity metrics, 44 million words were read. Average length of the article, 1,800 words. The cart to detail rate becomes the scroll to open. So how many people scrolled an article versus how many people just opened it. And the buy to detail becomes read to open rate. So how many people open an article and ended up scrolling to the bottom and spending a considerable amount of time on it. We can do this because in this case, I didn't find any e-commerce stuff important because the site is not an e-commerce site. But I wanted to use this reporting interface, just to switch it around for content instead. And I found very, very interesting results because of it. And then mobile, oh my God, this is difficult. Google Analytics and mobile analytics in general, I think, is still a paradigm waiting to be reshaped. We're still running into problems. GA forces us to this model of user sessions, and then we hit screen views. What is a screen view? Like, do you know those many mobile apps use horizontal scrollers and vertical scrollers, and there's no discrete screens. There are modals, there are contents that pop up, there are contents that float to the top. What's a session on a mobile phone? If I get notifications while I'm talking up here, people say, hey, I can see you at Dublin. That's an ongoing session, I think, because I'm actually interacting with the site. I'm actually interacting with the app, in a way, passively maybe. So we have this problem that GA for mobile gives us app instances and hits. Those are the two things that we can rely on maybe. So why use GA for mobile? Maybe we should look at something else like Firebase by Google. Firebase is great. It takes us back to that wonderful hit stream model of users with events. It's great, but it's difficult because we don't have sessions anymore. Sessions were wonderful because we could talk about them without understanding what they are. A very, very Finnish mentality, by the way. And then there are tools like Snowplow Analytics, which I'm a huge proponent of. Basically, you need to build the entire schema from bottom up, but that's the direction we're going to. I think we've reached a common level of maturity where we can't just take data models for granted anymore. We have to look at a paradigm shift in mobile analytics as well. So that's the tactical stuff, right? We have metrics, and we look at them, and we find flaws in them. Obviously, some of them work really nicely, and I'm not saying that you can't do great stuff with an out-of-the-box GA installation. Well, I am saying that, but I don't mean that. I do mean that, but I don't necessarily feel passionate enough to go on like 10 minutes about it, as I have now done. But I think it's very important from a tactical point of view. Like, you need to know the tools before you use them. I think that's, if I want to put it in a nutshell. It makes a lot of sense, but I don't think we're doing that enough for tools like GA, which is just so common and pervasive, and we see all these articles online. And same with A/B testing tools with their wonderful visual editors that let you add JavaScript anywhere you want, and your developers will love you for it. Well, that's half of the thing. So we have our tool understanding, we have our metrics, we have our things. And now we need to figure out how do we make our entire organization understand our efforts so that we're not just the analytics guy in the organization, shunned by all, loved by none. And we need to make, if you are an analytics person in your organization, I think that's already like your first mistake. There shouldn't be such a thing. Data isn't owned by anyone. It flows through the entire organization. It doesn't really care about job titles, does it? We're all producing data all the time. So how do we build up our organization? How do we combat Conway's law? So Conway is this mathematician guy who in the late 60s wrote that basically the gist is that if you have two parts of an organization that are unable to communicate with each other, then anything they build will be unable to communicate with each other. Like marketers and developers maybe, and a backend, and then your A/B testing tool, like maybe not able to communicate properly. So Conway's law is really, really useful when explaining this problem we have in organizations today. We build these silos up, like almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. We build those silos because we feel like there should be silos, because God forbid we have to talk with the developers. So we build those silos and we find out that because we don't really talk to them, it's very difficult to get changes implemented on a website or a mobile app. It's very difficult to make implementation work. So we look at things like this could be a team working on a project. We have marketers, we have biz people, data people, UX and IT. UX and IT might be really involved in the product, building a A/B testing framework, bringing all the data to the front end. The marketer might be occasionally visiting the project room, just going like, everything's going well, thank you very much. The biz and the data people are really out of it. The problem with this is there's no involvement. There's a team that's been established maybe, but they don't meet, they don't talk, they don't share ideas, they have built silos between them. So the first thing people tend to do to fix this is to add these little micro meetings everywhere. So these people meet now every 15 minutes on a Wednesday. These people meet at the cafeteria, and these people meet at the water cooler. Nothing's changed around the project, though. The same people interact with the project, but now there are these peripheral meetings going on all over the place. People are meeting because it's such a good idea to meet all the time and have good meetings and have long meetings. It's better, people communicate, but there's a great risk of this turning into a big game of Chinese whispers, where the message gets garbled along the way, and the stakeholders are completely lost out of the loop. So what is the solution? We can take a leaf from Agile's book, have daily meetings, come up with a multidisciplinary project team where all the stakeholders are present for 10 minutes every day. You can do it over Skype or Hangouts if you don't want to share the physical space with each other. At some point, you might want to do that just as a way to fix the organizational problems. Talk to each other. Introduce Friday demos. That's a wonderful habit. Show what you've been working on for the last 2 weeks. Talk about the tests that are currently running. Don't peek, but talk about them so that everybody knows what's going on. Show, like, the first thing we do when we go to a project is put up a big-ass dashboard that's behind all the meetings. So the data is all the time visible there. Then we have something to talk about and point to, instead of just speculating and thinking about things. So turn projects, take the agile method of meeting constantly with transparency of goals and ambitions. Put up a backlog with post-it notes, put it somewhere visible. Do something like that. And the second part, and this is for all those who are working as consultants or hiring consultants, I firmly believe that a consultant should make themselves redundant. And I say this as a consultant myself. I firmly believe this. I think consultants, we are responsible for teaching and facilitating. We are hired as experts, not as pairs of hands who do the dirty work. Our job is to facilitate this stuff. If I'm invited to a project, I'm happy to tell everything I know about GA and Google Tag Manager and A/B testing and these tools that we use and front-end and back-end development. I'm happy to share all that information. Because if the organization understands that better, it makes my job easier and it can help me look for the more interesting and significant things I can impact. So instead of having this wonderful Nordic power horse working for your project as a satellite consultant to whom you throw some empty Google Sheets and say, fill this. Don't do that. Don't. He's a wonderful person, and don't make him sweat with Excel files. Instead, invite him to the project, invite him to the daily meetings, invite him to the demos, make sure he works with you and suck him from all his brain power and knowledge so that he can facilitate your work. Because like I said, it's a democracy of I didn't say that, now I'm going to say it's a democracy of information. Analytics isn't confined to a single person. CRO isn't confined to a single. There are ubiquitous processes in organizations that want to grow. So experts should work with the team, teaching, facilitating, and building processes. And why do we do this? Why do we have a conversion conference in Google Dublin? It's because we've learned this one thing, is that this stuff is difficult. There's a reason there's a multi-billion, zillion, trillion-dollar business around data at the moment. It's only going to get hotter in a couple of weeks' time. But this stuff is difficult, and we should devote considerable resources in our organizations towards this. And I'm not just saying this because I know that people have lots of money to spend. I'm saying this because it's an investment, and if we don't invest in analytics tools, if we just take GA for its face value, for example, if we take Optimize for its face value, if we take WebTrick for its face value, I hope no one does that, but if we do, we're having problems because we need to turn those tools around. Unless you build your very own analytics tool from scratch, you're going to have the problem of predefined metrics contaminating your research, because those metrics have been designed by somebody who's not intimate with your company and not intimate with your business. So we have to find the triumvirate of business understanding and tool understanding, and my solution to bringing them together is a bit of agility, and doing those meetings, increasing transparency, increasing learning within a company. But obviously, you can have other ways to do it as well. So this 30-minute rant was brought to you by myself, and I hope you got something useful out of it. Thank you.